Hello everyone, and welcome to this second webinar of our series of webinars on data protection in journalism. Actually, today we are a bit off track about the data protection issues themselves, but there are some connections that we will see in a while. So welcome to Mario Santisteban Galarza, who will be our speaker today and will guide us among the issues related to disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. I wouldn't, I would give you the word directly, so we start. And before starting, I just remind you that you will be given the possibility to ask questions to Mario at the end of his presentation. So we are very happy to have you, to hear your voice. So please.
Thanks, Federico. Thank you for your introduction. Can you load the presentation, please? Or yeah. Okay, so I want to talk to you about these three different concepts: disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. I want to help you to distinguish between them, and I wanted to talk to you about what is doing the European Commission and some European member states to fight these different issues. Okay, so you can go on in the next image, please, Federico. Okay, so fake news has been a kind of like a hot topic since the 2016 election in the United States. It's a word that it's kind of like we use it in a more like common or informal language. Okay, but a lot of experts have said to us that it is not kind of like an adequate term. No? It's not kind of like a formal or correct term to use. Okay, this term, it has been used by some like politicians to discredit journalism, and the most well-known example is just Donald Trump just calling some CNN journalists, "You are fake news." Okay. Secondly, this is not a good term, because we're not talking about journalistic mistakes when we are talking about fake news. Okay, journalistic mistakes are covered by freedom of information. Okay, so if this is just an unintentional mistakes, and if journalists have trustworthy sources of news that appear to be accurate, that's legal content and should be not erased, for instance. Okay, for example, when we're talking about fake news, it's about harmful content. Okay, so in order to substitute this term of fake news that is not quite correct, we have a report by the Council of Europe, a great report that I will advise you to read, that is called Informational Disorders. And this report distinguishes between three different categories. Okay, the first one is disinformation. Is information that is false and is deliberately created to harm a person, or organization, or a country. Okay, in this case, of course, we're talking about information that in reality doesn't match with reality, but the author of the information has a purpose, and the author of that false information is aware that he or she is spreading falsehoods in the internet. Okay, by contrast, we have misinformation, information that is as well false, but it's not created with or the intention of harm people. Okay, so the main difference here is the purpose. So we can say, but if I, for instance, I just share a story in my social media, Facebook or Twitter, that is false, I'm being misinformed, and I'm kind of like misinforming people. But that's not disinformation, okay? Because I'm not aware that I am spreading that false story. So that's the main difference there that is quite important. And finally, we have malinformation. information that is based on reality that aims to inflict harm. So in this case, when we're talking about malinformation, we really don't care about is the source being false or truth, okay, or true, okay. It's more about this concept is linked to some, for instance, leaks or of governmental sources, or for instance, some content that is private for a person, okay, and we shouldn't share with others. That is covered, for instance, by the right to privacy. It could, in this case, fall under the regulation of the GDPR. Okay, so you can move to the next one, Federico, if you don't mind. Yes, so here's a graphic. Yeah, there. Thank you. There's a graphic of the three concepts and what they do and do not share in common. So when misinformation, disinformation, both share in common that are false information. But as I was telling, the main difference is the falseness, the notion of veracity. Whereas in the case of disinformation and malinformation is the intention to harm, the purpose or the aim that the spreader of the information share, okay, or wants to share. Okay. You can move to the next one. Thank you. Okay, so our main concern here should be disinformation because, well, for two reasons. The first one is because we really want to prevent people to being disinformed. We want to kind of like identify the persons or that are disinforming the public, okay? And which are their aims, which are their purposes, and trying to kind of like reduce the impact of this disinformation. And secondly, because in the case of malinformation, we already have other legal tools, okay? It's not a concept, some new and link it to what is being called fake news. So we have other legal tools to face malinformation, okay? As well, I have to say that disinformation is kind of like the main term used by the European institutions. For instance, is the term that has adopted the high-level expert group on fake news and disinformation. Okay, the high-level expert group defines disinformation as all forms of fake, inaccurate, or misleading information designed, presented, and promoted to intentionally, and I want to highlight again and again, intentionally, to cause public harm for profit. I think that one of the best insights that gave us this high-level expert group is the distinction between disinformation from other content that really is illegal. For instance, disinformation is content that has the capacity of harm our democracies, okay? But it's not illegal content, okay? It's a difference. It's kind of a thin difference, but it's important. Whereas our other categories, like hate speech, that of course could harm our democracies, but is illegal, that is content that is illegal, that our legal frameworks do already sanction or punish in their laws, okay? Well, as I was saying, the main difference between disinformation and misinformation is the purpose of the author or the spreader of the false information. And there are two main purposes in this matter. The first one, and the more well-known, is to obtain profit. Spreading disinformation is quite profitable in the internet. And to explain that, I want to share a story with you that was reported by Craig Silverman, the owner of BuzzFeed, in early 2016, about these websites of Australian kids, Australian young people that were creating information about the 2016 United States campaign. Okay, so these young people really didn't care about the result of the vote. They weren't supporters of Trump or Hillary. What they wanted to do is to create sites that were quite appealing to conservative parties voter. Okay, so to a conservative parties voter. So these people will click in their sites, and these young people will obtain profit from the visualizations of the ads. So that's the common like example of this information, or the monetization of the information. You have a site of news, people click in that site, and you earn profit from the ads that are placed in these sites. Okay, so it's more related more to an economical motivation. Okay, secondly, and I think this is the most worrying aim that is linked with disinformation, is the use of disinformation as a political weapon. since 2015, the European Commission has identified political campaigns of disinformation that are being carried out by foreign actors, like even concrete states like Russia and China. So it appears to be that these campaigns, what they want is to alter the public opinion of some European democracies, okay? And one of the most dangerous aspects of these campaigns is that they rely in automatic tools, okay? They use fake accounts, they use bots, okay, to amplify this disinformation. So their impact is kind of like has a wider impact or effect, okay? Can you move please to the next one, Federico? Thank you. So we know what are the main differences between disinformation, or we really understand the terms behind this phenomena, okay? But why we should really fight disinformation, or because there is a kind of like a liberal approach that says that we shouldn't, okay? This approach is based on this idea of the marketplace of ideas. And it's an approach that was kind of like carried out by the judge in the United States. It was called Judge Holmes, a judge of the Supreme Court of the United States, that says that the best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market. So it's kind of a liberal approach that says that, okay, we should allow all opinions, we should allow all sources of news, different news, and this news will compete in the market under the laws of offer and demand, and the consumers in the market will choose the best truth, will choose the best opinion, okay? So, okay, this kind of approach, this liberal approach, maybe it worked like during this liberal era in the last century, but now we have to understand that the ecosystem of the internet is very different. And I will link this with the idea of the filter bubble and the echo chambers. So now the information that will prevail in the market is the one that the algorithms will show to us. And that information is the one that is kind of like more tailored to our own beliefs, to our own prejudices, okay? So it's kind of like not the best information, not the more reliable and accurate information, it's the one that will foster our own prejudice, our own political beliefs, okay? Well, the main reason that European Union and the European Commission is kind of like the background of the response against disinformation is that our open democratic societies depend in public debates that allow well-informed citizens to express their will through free processes, free democratic processes. So when we are fighting disinformation, we care about our political debates. If we don't share a background of a common understanding of what's happening in reality, maybe we share different beliefs about what we should do to tackle the problems in our democratic societies, but we need to share kind of like a common background on reality. If we don't share that, it's impossible to argue. It's impossible to have a rational debate about anything. Okay, so and that's kind of the heart of our democracies. We are deliberately democracies. Okay, we depend in rational debates to obtain agreements between citizens. Okay, and we in Europe, the freedom of expression is and freedom of information are active rights, laws against rights against the power, but are laws for the citizens too. It's a passive right to get a good information from journalism and the state. Okay, so there is kind of like a passive role that could be put in danger as well with disinformation. So could you go to the next image, please? Yeah, thank you. Having said all that, that doesn't mean that fighting disinformation does really mean deleting news, taking down content, okay? And there is a problem because the European Union has a lot of legal obstacles to do that. And there's a problem with the scope of freedom of expression, okay? Freedom of expression is different in Germany and Spain, in Austria, okay? This is not a competence of the European institutions to say what is freedom of expression or not, okay? to say that some speech is outside the protection. Of course, there's a common kind of like a common approach in the European Court of Human Rights, okay, but that's kind of a minimum on that the court only gives a response when freedom of expression is really at risk, okay. So I will say in this common approach on this minimum, limiting the spread of disinformation will be possible. I'm talking in this moment of erasing news, okay, but always just under judicial scrutiny, okay, always under the review of a judge, okay. But with this principle of judicial scrutiny, there are two main problems in the era of the internet. The first one is the problem of content moderation. Nowadays, the ones that the actors that decide what is allowed and not in the scope of freedom of expression and freedom of speech in the internet are more like these great stakeholders, such as social media companies or browsers, okay, and not really the states. So there's kind of like what is being called a vicariant censorship or a private censorship, not censorship in the way that we understood it, okay, censorship from the state, but just a kind of like soft censorship here. And it's kind of like there's a hard alternative to this because it's impossible to adjust to control all the content in the internet, okay? So we, governments and the legislative power do really rely on these gatekeepers to undertake the content curation, okay? So can you move, Federico? The next one. Okay, so, okay, having into account all of this, taking into account all this, what has done the European Commission to tackle disinformation? So the main response has I don't know if the audio in a moment it's okay. It was a cause that interrupted me. Sorry. I will repeat. Okay. So as I was saying, the main response that the Commission has given to us is not a strong response, as strong about deleting or erasing or taking down content that people flag as disinformation. Okay. It has been a soft law response, an instrument that we call the Code of Practice on Disinformation. Okay. Is an instrument that is open to sign, okay, to different signatories, to different stakeholders like browsers, like social media and big tech companies, okay? So it's not like a directive or a regulation. It doesn't have the same binding force or like that kind of legal resource, okay? So the code doesn't bet for just erasing disinformation. It's more like trying to empower society and researchers to fight against this issue. It's kind of like trying to establish a collaborative response between society and these big social media companies, okay? It has an enforcement system that relies in annual reports and has an annually assessment by the Commission. And the code kind of like proposes 5 big measures, 5 pillars of measures that these stakeholders have to carry out just to. Can you move to the next one, Federico? Yeah, there's. So we have 5 different measures under this Code of Practice in Disinformation that these social media or browsers have to undertake. The first one is the scrutiny of ad placements. This is quite linked with the economic aim behind disinformation. The idea is that social media have to be very careful in which places they put ads on. So they have to kind of like impose filters or to really put attention in which in the places, the news sites in which they allow to be ads on. So you can then demote this content, or maybe you can kind of like trying to, I would say to protect consumers doing this kind of like trying to, I don't know how to explain it. It's more like about trying to not monetize this disinformation and this specific sites that we know that they are constantly spreading disinformation. Okay, the second one is quite related to ads too, but it's more about political ads. Okay, and these are more measures of transparency for users, for online users. So when we see a political ad in our feeds and our Facebook or Twitter feeds, we are able to distinguish that ad from another content posted by a user, and we know who is the person behind that ad and the person who has paid for it. Okay, this is kind of like trying to respond to these campaigns behind Cambridge Analytica and all this. Just giving transparency with ads, political ads, will help to just trying to erase these campaigns. Okay. Thirdly, we have what is being called integrity of services. Okay, so this social media have to be quite careful in trying to not be used these services by bots or fake accounts. Okay, and this is one of the main motors of disinformation behind these fake accounts, as I was already saying, in the sense of using disinformation as a political weapon. Thirdly, we have another measure that there are a package of measures just to trying to empower consumers. And the Commission doesn't want to remove information, but disinformation news, but really wants to give an open door to demote this content, to downgrade this content in these feeds. So, for instance, what really wants to foster is social media to contact fact-checkers organization. So these fact-checkers that are reliable and are independent, so tag some news. And when you tag that news in the feeds, that will downgrade their position in the order that the news feeds. So we can maybe not see it in the first post of the news, okay? So they are more like down in the line of the news feed, okay? Secondly, in this particular pillar, we have just developing tools to have a more customized experience by users. And the thing is, this is one of the best measures because, for instance, one of the measures in this pillar that you said that is linked to Facebook, in this case, this social media develop a technique. So if a fact checker, for instance, tagged as news as disinformation, a user that already has seen that news will kind of like get an alarm or a notification that that news was flagged. So you are not deleting the news. That user will have the chance to even to share it again. Okay, but that user will have the information, the report of the fact checker explaining why that news is kind of like not based on reality. Okay, so I think it's a kind of like a good soft measures, okay, to raise awareness about this issue, but not in a hard way. And finally, we have measures trying to promote accountability and transparency in social media and how they cope with this information. And this is kind of relating, try to explain to researchers and fact checkers how their algorithms work relating to filtering systems and how they display this information. So it's more about sharing data. Okay, can you move to the next one, Federico, please? Okay, finally, I wanted to talk to you about two laws. Okay, in this case, we are talking about European member law states. Okay, no laws in the European members. I'm talking about concrete states. The first one is the German Network Enforcement Act, and there's a lot of confusion about this German law. This is not really a law that wants to tackle the particular issue of disinformation. It's more a law that wants to bring more transparency about how content moderation works in Germany, okay? So this law really establishes two different measures. The first one is to establish a procedure to give to users the chance to tag some content like illegal, okay? Content that is already illegal under the code of the criminal code of Germany, okay? So the user can tag this content and social media will have a 24 hours time or 7 days, depending on the content, to just to take down this post or this particular content that is being spread, okay? So it's more about the enforcement of previous criminal laws in the internet with the help of social media, okay? As well, the second measure that implements this law is a system of reports. So German authorities have more data about these measures that social media are implemented and the amount of takedowns, the amount of fake accounts that are being erased from social media. So, and this is a hard law instrument in contrast with the code. So these German authorities are able to impose fines if, for instance, Facebook doesn't want to share data with the German authorities, data that could be quite interesting from research purposes. Okay, so you can move to the next one, Federico. Finally, we have the layer, some law in French. I won't try to pronounce it, to fight the manipulation of information. So this law is kind of like the only law in the European Union that really tackles the issue of information in having kind of like a hard response. This law really entails erasing news, deleting information, okay? And this law was kind of like made just trying to fight some of these political campaigns of disinformation from Russia, okay? The law addresses any allegation of a fact that is inaccurate or misleading. However, this law requires that the information that is being disseminated, that's been spread, is artificially boosted, okay? So this law only attacks artificial information that is amplified by the use of bots or artificial intelligence. Also, this law is only applicable during an electoral procedure, okay? So the aim of this law is kind of trying to ensure that an election is not going to be affected by disinformation or hugely amplify disinformation. Another guarantee that has this law is that it is under the scrutiny of a judge. Okay, so it's an extraordinary judicial procedure. Okay, and well, so we can see that this law is kind of like has a hard response against disinformation, but it's kind of narrow. The scope of this law is kind of pretty narrow. So some critics of the law say something that's quite clever, that the bill is the 24 hours time period that the judge has to remove the content or to order social media to remove that content is at the same, short and too long. Short because the impact of the disinformation is going to be imminent, quite rapid. So in that 24 hours, a lot of people is going to be quite misinformed, but at the same time, it's kind of, I would say, too long because kind of like the judge needs more time to kind of like think about or trying to balance the different rights. Okay, so and when we're talking about freedom of information, we need a really good scrutiny in order to not make mistakes. Okay, so we can move to the final picture, Federico. Okay, so what's the future of the fight against disinformation? Well, the Commission has already posted some guidelines to trying to kind of actualize the code of practice on disinformation. It's because the Commission has identified a lot of shortcomings in the code, and the major issues that have been shown is that social media are kind of like not wanted to share a lot of data when researchers and independent social civil actors. And besides, the fight against the demonetization of disinformation has been quite bad or overall or requires a lot of improvement. So what the Commission really wants to attempt is kind of like actualize the code. It transform the code of practice on disinformation in a code of conduct. Okay, and this notion of a code of conduct is kind of like a new legal tool that will introduce the Digital Service Act. Okay, so if you are not aware about this Digital Service Act, it's like kind of like a new proposal of the Commission. Okay, and this law is about kind of trying to control how social media undertake their duty of content moderation in trying to ensure kind of more healthy online environment without kind of like affecting freedom of expression or freedom of information. And in this law, there are kind of like some obligations for some platforms like social media, some large social media platforms. And in between this obligation are kind of like establishing code of conduct and impact assessments in matters concretely. And between these matters is the fight against disinformation. So this way, making this code of conduct, we will get a better enforcement system. So because the Digital Service Act allows the Commission and some authorities to impose fines when social media kind of like don't comply pretty well with the codes of conduct. So it's gonna like go. We are kind of like timidly going from a soft law instrument to a hard law instrument. And that's all for me. Thank you for your attention, and I will be pretty pleased to just respond to your comments and your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mario. It was very interesting. And yeah, as I said, the floor is open for questions. If someone wants to raise the hand, you're free to speak. And meanwhile, it's interesting that you picked the cases of France and Germany, which are both countries that are going to elections in the next month. So it will be interesting to see how it goes there as for the issues of disinformation and misinformation on on political ads and in general.
Yeah, the European Commission, one of the main reasons, because a lot of these laws entered or were debated quite rapidly, but quite fast, because the issue of elections that were around the corner when this law, the drafts were kind of like this, when the drafts were discussing in these countries, in France particularly, it was because the European parliamentary elections were pretty near, and some elections in France too.
Yeah. Yeah, and also the other issue you mentioned a couple of times about the sharing of data by social media platforms is also a critical topic, since I mean, if they don't share data, it's impossible for researchers to actually see what they are actually doing.
Yeah.
So
it's quite hard, almost impossible. Yeah, I think Elena was questioning about the use of intelligence in the fight against disinformation. Well, I think that artificial intelligence is already being used in the use when trying to demote content or downgrade content. Okay, when we see a feed in Facebook, we see an order in the post, and artificial intelligence is using to demote that position of disinformation to the bottom. Okay, and this is a main problem, because I believe that artificial intelligence is quite good, for instance, for identifying child pornography videos or terrorist videos that have already been flagged as illegal. Okay, so artificial intelligence is quite good at comparing between two databases and saying, okay, there is a hash and there is a match between both databases. Okay, and it's quite efficient in that field. But in the fight against disinformation, you have to kind of like analyze the context of the website. Which is the owner of who's the owner of the website? Okay, which is the purpose of the owner behind the website? Really wants to inform the public, or you just want to spread falsehoods, kind of like to obtain money from the visualization of their ads? Okay, so I think that there's a great report if you want more information about the use of artificial intelligence to tackle this information. And it's a report I think was supported by the European Parliament, and the main kind of like result of the report is this, that maybe artificial intelligence is not ready yet to help us in the fight against disinformation. So thank you, Elena, for your question. I think there was another one.
Yes, Sophia raised her hand.
Hey, hello.
Hello.
Thanks, Mario, for your presentation. I wanted to ask you something about the content moderation. So you know, in the EU Code of Practice, there's it is repeatedly said that this content moderation should be based on the criteria of, for example, prioritizing trustworthy information.
Yeah.
But so I would like to ask you what you think about this. You know, this word trustworthiness. Who decides what's trustworthy? Should be these white males in the Silicon Valley, and also the fact checkers point. You know, it seems fact checkers are given by the Commission a big role in this scheme. But do we have an idea of how they would actually be able to do all that work? Who should finance them? I mean, should they be working for the platforms themselves? Because it seems like they're designed like superheroes there, but how can they do all the work on their own, you know? So
it's kind of like almost impossible. What thanks you for the question. One of the if you read the guidelines of the Commission, the new guidelines that kind of like overviews the main shortcomings of the code. The guidelines say like the participation in the fact-checking community with social media is kind of like arbitrary and there's a low participation, and there is the problem of languages, because in the European we have a lot of languages. In our own countries, like there's so few kind of like fact-checker organizations that do really work with social media. So in that countries, like the enforcement of the code is kind of like more weak than others. Okay, you're just pointing out one of the problems with the truth and who established it. And of course, with content moderation, we can distinguish between hard measures like erasing content, suspensions accounts, but there are other measures like you pointed out, like demoting content. Demoting content is kind of a pretty soft censorship, okay? And it's in our social media ecosystem, time is quite important, because we maybe enter in a Twitter account on a Facebook, if we only see maybe in the first 40 results. If that information is in the, I don't know, in the 102 spot, we won't be able to see it. And that's kind of like a soft censorship. I don't like the word censorship a lot because legally goes to another terms. But yeah, as you pointed out, it's kind of like hard to distinguish or hard to establish who is the person that should do it. I believe that fact checkers are able to do this kind of work. We will more have to, but if they have enough resources and they are kind of like part of organizations that we know that are trustworthy and are independent. But I think that should bet more in, for instance, measures like the content, the context button on Facebook, just to get into, okay, you have seen this information that a fact checker has tagged as false, but only the opinion of the fact checker, but you are reminded of that, and you have the capacity, the ability to access more news, to be more well informed, but not to hard measures such as erasing or downgrading the content in a way that is almost invisible. Okay, so I know that I haven't fully answered your question, but thank you for your attention.
Thanks. If you have been promoted to president of the European Commission, probably nobody can do it. Thanks.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Sofia, and thank you, Mario. Yeah, so I was thinking earlier when you mentioned AI to demote content, that sometimes AI could also like do the opposite, like evaluating as false or problematic news that is completely true and newsworthy.
Yeah.
So that is another problem when you
are
leave.
In that case. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Imagine you in that case, you're a newspaper and you rely on social media to kind of run your business. If the algorithm tags you as disinformation, you're going to be in the bottom of the line, and that news won't have impact. And will give you money from the ads that you get from the visualization of that ads that you get from that news. So that could be a great problem to journalism if we don't really do it well. Okay. So I think there was another question there.
Yeah, it's Federica who writes, in Italy, we have a debate about the governative app called IO to deal with data about COVID-19 and vaccines. The main problem individuated by the privacy authority is about data sharing with company outside Italy and Europe, company that don't have to follow our GDPR, etc. Do you know about similar problems in other EU countries?
Well, I think that's more like an issue about data transferring to foreign countries, and if the GDPR really allow that transferring. I think I'm not an expert in data protection, but if there are, well, you probably will know more about that, this Federico. But I think there are provisions in the GDPR that establish the conditions in which data can be shared with foreign countries, and one of those conditions is that that country really kind of has a legal framework or some guarantees that are similar to the GDPR. So you can explore with that if really that application that you're talking about does really comply with these requirements or not. And if it doesn't, I don't know if that transference of data is going to be lawful under the European laws. What do you think about that? If I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer and an expert, a legal expert on this, but maybe if Inigo was here, he would be the person to ask such a question. Yeah, which is interesting also because there's also a problem of the purpose for which you consent to the use of your personal data, and if you don't explicitly consent to the transfer of it to other countries, maybe there are some issues here. But again, it's
and you will have to get the information when you are giving, when they ask you about consent in that data processing, you will have to be informed that your data might be transferred to another country in that case. But if you seek that provisions that of the GDPR, I think Article 40 or so, you will there find that some requirements have to be kind of like fulfilled to share that data with other countries. Okay.
Yeah. There's another raised hand, Ashwini.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
Hello. Hi, I'm joining in from Sri Lanka, and it was a very useful talk. The question that I want to ask is, now Sri Lanka is also looking at criminalizing fake news. So the question I have in mind is, how do you define fake news? So I know you mentioned about disinformation and how it's important to distinguish on the basis of intent. But again, there's a problem with differentiating between intent and no intent, and it could lead to over-regulation because you're looking at a minute difference between whether it's intent and no intent. Your thoughts on this, and how do you think it can be helped?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of the question? I think the audio, I didn't hear it pretty well. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that it's a very thin line to distinguish on the basis of intent, and we could probably step into over-regulation where even those without an intent could be punished if the definition is quite vast. So any thoughts on how we can differentiate between misinformation and other types of fake news that don't have to be regulated other than intent? I understand intent is important. Any other indicators in your view?
I think the main, okay, thank you for your question. I think we always, when we are talking about, it's hard to explain, or it's kind of like strange, but we should, I think when we were trying to punish someone, or we want to erase content, or we have to forget the notion of truth. Okay, truth is an epistemological matter, a philosophical matter that the state should never impose. Okay, when maybe truth has to do with law. Okay, there is an interest in truth in law when we're talking about, for instance, a criminal procedure. Okay, so we have to kind of give an answer to society about a concrete issue, but that's a legal response and it's a legal truth, but that's not the actual truth. That's not reality. Okay, and it's important to go outside that notion of truth and center. Okay, which is the intention of the author? The author wants to, for instance, just give information to the public, wants to stimulate a debate, even if that information can be, I don't know, not harmful, but could disturb us with hate speech. The aim of this person is to stimulate a debate or not. Okay, so it's more about that. If you just criminalize false information are mistakes made by journalists. And as I was saying to you, that information is covered overall. I don't know in your legal framework, but in European legal framework, it's covered by freedom of speech and freedom of information. So if you want to criminalize disinformation, something that is hard to do without going into this direction, you have to kind of like pay attention more in the intention. And to analyze the intention, you need that to be under the scrutiny of a judge. A judge is the only person that can say, okay, this person really wanted to inform us or just wanted to obtain profit, misinforming or disinforming us. Okay, I hope I did answer your question with those notions.
Thank you, because there was this interesting debate that I was a part of where one of the speakers said we should move away from intent and think of harm. Where he said that harm is most important for us to see rather than when we are looking at punishing or regulating disinformation or just loosely fake news, we have to look at harm as opposed to intent. What would your views on that be?
Yeah, if really that information can harm people. Okay, I think that's kind of like a notion that is quite linked to the French law. That is kind of like French law is a law that is not going to be applicable and how to say it's not going to be applied. Okay, because really relies in harm, relies in disinformation that is so huge that can affect a vote, that can affect a society, so that can affect the sincerity of a vote. So in that case, we can say that will harm really our society, that information. Okay, so it's not quite likely to happen. Okay, and of course, I think that harm is quite linked with hate speech. Okay, and of course that disinformation and hate speech are different categories, but they in some cases they can overlap. Okay, so if you are spreading this information to just affect a vulnerable group or a minority, okay, and you have the intention to, for instance, to instigate violence by those disinformation, using disinformation, in that case, we would argue that it would be punished, okay, because most kind of like a more direct and real harm to a person. Okay, I don't know with this. Okay, thank you for your questions.
Great. So if there aren't any other questions, I would wrap up. And so thank you very much, Mario, for your presentation and for answering our participants' questions. And I put the presentation in the chat.
Okay.
So if anyone wants to has other requests or questions, please drop me a line. You have my email address from the registration email. And I also remind you that we have 2 more webinars in this series, which are in the first week of July, so the 6th and the 8th of July. So yeah, I will send a reminder via email beforehand. So yeah, thanks again.
Yeah,
Mario.
thank you for and all the attenders. Very wonderful questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.